Thanks very much, Richard. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you for the recognition of the critical role that the National Library of Medicine plays in preparing a world for data sharing and open science and advancing both the technologies and the policies necessary to make this happen. I'm looking forward to hearing questions and conversation with the community today, because I will tell you from the beginning, as Lyric already identified, data sharing is a team sport. And we really need lots of people engaged with this as we go through the process. I want to begin by reminding you why we're here and why we're having this conversation. We're here because we believe that data sharing and open science accelerates discovery. This is absolutely critical. It not simply makes it more efficient, but can take us farther than we ever had envisioned. But we're trying to accelerate that discovery because we want to improve health. So our purpose of being today and NIH's interest in this area has to do fundamentally with ensuring the improvement of the health of every individual in the world. Today, in my 20 minutes or 15 minutes of remarks and some conversation, I wanted to accomplish 5 things. So this is going to be a whirlwind tour. I want to talk about what kinds of data NIH shares and what's happening specifically under the COVID pandemic that's offering us new opportunities to advance the NIH's vision and mission and data sharing. I want to talk with you about what's happened during the COVID pandemic that resulted directly from data sharing and open science. I do need to back up and talk about the fact that data science and open data and data sharing is not a new activity for the NIH. We've been preparing for this for years. We are at a wonderful confluence where the urgency of a public health demand, the readiness of investigators to try new ways of doing research, and the availability of good tools is actually taking us a quantum leap forward. I'll speak a little bit about what we've learned in the process, and I'll talk a little bit about what, looking back, we wish we had in place. And again, I'm looking forward to your comments. When the NIH speaks of data sharing, as Lyric mentioned, it's lots of different kinds of data. As certainly at the National Library of Medicine, our molecular data repositories are our largest repository of data. They are, when we think about data sharing, we open access to de-identified or controlled access data related to genomics, proteomics, RNA, viruses now. And this is our large volumes of data that are stored for very specialized purposes and are shared by individuals who often have a high level of intellectual interest and scientific knowledge about the data they're using. At the same time, we also share clinical trial summary data. We share information about the registration of clinical trials and the reports of the results. What's important there is that this data has to span the user group from your mother or a clinician looking for a clinical trial for an individual to a policymaker, to another scientist. And while we share the declaration of the study, its key components such as the informed consent, we are increasingly now, almost 50,000 of our studies have their primary outcomes reported. These data are reported in an accessible format, not always machine readable, but accessible, and it's in public accountability, but also inspires the scientific community. The NIH is investing in developing specialized collections. For example, the All of Us program, a 1 million-person cohort, is collecting information about everyday health, genomic profiles of individuals, and electronic health records data in a specialized enclave that can be accessed both by researchers with permissions as well as the general public. The All of Us program was set up with an eye to sharing from the very beginning. The NC3 cohort, or the National COVID Cohort Collaborative, is built under the auspices of the NCATS, and they are developing a platform that allows for access to a partial extract from electronic health records. In the lower right-hand corner, you see some of their statistics from the end of April. Almost 5 million patients represented, 1.2 million COVID positive patient representatives, 5 billion rows of data, and there's over 173 approved projects. Now, access to the NC3 Cohort Collaborative is a little bit different than the All of Us program. It is a much more complicated platform to access. There's many training programs in place to support it. So what you're seeing here is the beginnings of NIH not just simply opening data resources, but putting the tools in place to make the data shareable. The National Library of Medicine has particular responsibility for sharing the literature. And in the past year, particularly because of the pandemic, we have started a pilot in support of the NIH's vision that preprints are a valuable source appropriate for creating interim reports of research and need to be accessible. So it is now possible to search for and locate and discover preprints within the PubMed Central repository, and they also have a bibliographic record reported in PubMed. Notice on the screen to the side, the green bar that says this article is a preprint. We thought long and hard about opening our precious literature repositories to preprints. We recognize the brand that the NLM has. This is a little bit like investigators needing to learn a new sociology of sharing. We wanted to apply the data, the openness of our data to the community and make sure people understood this, the slight change in this data. That's where there's both a human readable as well as an electronic indicator of a preprint. In addition to the preprints, PubMed Central provides a repository of data provided in support of specific research findings. So PubMed Central is becoming both a source of literature as data as well as quantitative data from studies. And finally, we are growing the de-identified data from research projects. Now, NIH has always managed research data repositories, but we're increasing their use, particularly under the COVID pandemic. We are creating something that will serve as a repository, a hub for data de-identified from across all of our projects. The two key projects I want to bring your attention to that NIH is investing in under the COVID pandemic are the PASC, the NIH Research Initiative on the post-acute sequela of the SARS-CoV-2 infection, and the Rapid Acceleration of Diagnosis, or the RADx projects. Together, these two represent almost $2 billion in research. The RADx projects are about a year old. The PASC projects are just beginning in the last couple of weeks, but embedded in both of them are the principles of data sharing from the beginning of the research process. That is, what consents need to be in place for data sharing? How do we have to formalize data such as common data elements so we can actually move harmonization upstream? And ultimately, how will we get data deposited into the research data hubs? RADx is only one of the sets of projects that NIH is doing in response to the COVID pandemic. There are many other activities, including projects that reach directly into the lives of women and children, and much of our basic biological work. Many of our investigators pivoted a year ago to focus their own talents on answering some of the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, what have we learned so far? What happens when data are shared and science is open during a pandemic? Well, we know that the vaccines entered phase 3 clinical trials within 180 days of the first characterization of the coronavirus infection. We are better able to acquire timely characterization of variants. And as is well known, the changing nature of this virus requires us to know quickly as variants emerge. The UK virus, the South American, South African. Having data open allows us to characterize and classify variants. We have seen rapid evaluation of therapeutics, and we have seen some therapeutics actually be removed from the therapeutic evaluation because they've proven to be futile. We have interventions being designed in real time. As data are pulled from near real-time experiences, we are able to modify either the data collection that's needed or the intervention for specific care processes, for example, cardiopulmonary supports. One of the most important and exciting things is we have isolated experiences of symptoms can now be organized into syndromes so we can understand this pandemic in much more sophisticated ways. And frankly, when data are shared, the public is reassured. There's an transparency, there's an aura of science with the curtain open, and this is essential. But what else can happen? Well, as Richard mentioned earlier, the sociology of science is shifting, and it's shifting slowly, I'd have to say. We have a concept of paying it forward in data management strategies, where now the management of data is not solely to serve the investigators' specific goals of that project, but to plan to make data available for future projects, helping to understand and balance investigator incentives with social and scientific social good. It represents a critical challenge that I hope this very workshop is going to help us with. As data are exposed, the self-correction cycle of science speeds up. This is good and bad. Think about preprints and how original hypothesis with preliminary data may be refined over time. The society as a whole is not used to the self-correcting cycle of science. And now when data are publicly open and shared, that cycle happens much quicker. So we have to assist society in interpreting information, which leads to our third observations. The public expectation of certainty conflicts with the rapid release of information. And we have a challenge here to have a society that perhaps lacks the numeracy and scientific reflection that we'd like to have, be able to address the concerns and properly interpret the data as it's being shared. Remember, once data are shared, particularly publicly shared, many things can happen that might be out of the control of the investigator. Now, NIH did a lot to lay the groundwork for data sharing. We didn't wake up in the beginning of the pandemic and say, we better have this in place. Lyric reviewed for you the policies and practices we've already been working on. For example, our data management and sharing plans go back over 25 years. Now, we also have seen an increased interest in how to help investigators choose appropriate outlets for their data. So we have generated the desirable characteristics of generalist research data repositories. Through workshops and conversations, we want to give the researchers the tools they need to be able to do their work. We have expanded the NIH's public access policy, so the public access policy, almost a decade old, to share literature immediately, to make the findings of results available within the 1 year of the close of a study, has actually enabled early data sharing and openness in science. We don't do all of this work alone. We have partnerships with the CDC. We have partnerships, longstanding partnerships with the International Nucleotide Sequence Database Collaboration. These partnerships are the foundation upon which we're able to build these new data sharing activities. So we were ready in part for the pandemic as it emerged, and the push towards accelerating data sharing and open science was possible because of many years of investment. We've also been investing in modernizing the data ecosystem. We've moved many of our precious resources, such as the Sequence Read Archive, into cloud instances, making them more accessible, taking advantage of emerging technologies. And also, as I said, we are creating a research data hub from all of the RADx projects to make sure we're able to access the information and make it persistently available for investigators to use. Let me talk about the critical steps that were taken by the NIH during the COVID pandemic and during our RADx projects, PASC, and the other acronyms we use to describe our COVID investment. First, we adopted early on an innovative organization for research, conceptualizing these large projects from a hub and spoke model. So every one of our large initiatives has individual investigator activities that are organized under a data coordinating center. The data coordinating centers partner with the individual research projects to make sure, for example, that the informed consents actually cover the full range of information that needs to be addressed, that we have a mechanism for handling data transfer. We have strategies that are common for handling de-identification. We took a model that looked at the data lifecycle planning. With an eye to reuse, you must begin at the beginning in terms of how consent forms work, how proposals are written, how data structures in the individual projects are set up to enable downstream sharing. The NIH has had a long-standing commitment to common data elements and common data models over 10 years now. We have over 200 funding announcements that specify the use of common data elements. But what we learned during COVID and the steps we took during COVID was to actually formalize specific common data elements that would be required for any human participant-based research, working with our investigators to embed new or at least unfamiliar approaches to data collection into their research programs was in itself a challenge. And we are investing in data repositories. We recognize the importance of a wide range of repositories, special purpose repositories, generalist repositories, but along with each of those repositories comes the need to make sure we have good metadata and good discovery services. Let me take a few minutes to talk to you about what we have learned during this only short 14 months experience. We have learned that there are many stakeholders in the data. There are private companies, there are researchers, there are newspaper writers, and we need to make sure that we address the needs of those various stakeholders in a way that they can best understand our policies and our practice to best be able to use information. It's critical to have a chain of trust in place. And that chain of trust begins with data collected from the individual patient all the way through to its reuse in through a research data repository. The participant has to trust from the very beginning that we will handle their data with the proper level of privacy and security, and with a commitment to extend its scientific value as much as possible. This means consent is very important. Our informed consent forms require that we help people understand at the moment every possible thing that can happen with their data. We might want to look at your Medicare claims in the future or the death data. We have recognized that being able to link records across study and to have the ability to recontact participants at some time in the future is desirable by many researchers. We neither have the strong technologies nor the policies in place to make this simple. NIH, through their Data Science Policy Council, is standing up a number of groups to examine privacy-preserving record linkage strategies and to better understand the risks of unintended re-identification of individuals. When we focus on research reuse, we have to be sure we're actually getting what an individual's incentives align with. And the last three questions: where are we going to put it, for how long, and once it's there, can we really find it? Deal with the repository structure, and I believe that's going to be critical to the ability to share data in the future. Let me close by looking back in the rearview mirror and say what we really wish we had in place when the pandemic began. Effective ways to integrate data from clinical records that would allow us to acquire near real-time data in a safe and ethical fashion. We don't have that figured out yet. Some of the work NIH has done around the FHIR standards, encouraging researchers to begin to use tools for this, are taking us a little bit further along. Having some strategy for generalized consent. I know that's a controversial concept, but generalized consent so that the participants can participate in the way they find meaningful. And finally, we recognize the critical importance of managing data from special populations, respecting tribal rights, and understanding the proper way of representing both individuals and individual networks in research data related to public health. I wish you success over the next couple of days of this workshop, and I look forward to your comments. You can reach me on the information on the screen. Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard.